know. I don't know. I have a lot of respect, and I really like President Xi. I don't know that he's going to be able to pull it off. It may have to be a much more difficult ending, to be honest with you. But he is trying. I believe he is trying. And he's a friend of mine, and I really like him a lot. We'll see what happens.
That was President Trump on his concerns on whether China can disarm North Korea. This amid another nuclear missile test from the North this morning. President Trump responding to the launch on Twitter, saying North Korea disrespected the wishes of China and its highly respected president when it launched, though unsuccessfully, a missile today. Bad. Joining us now to discuss is Gordon Chang, an Asia analyst and the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. First, let me just ask you, because you say it's possible this was not a failed launch attempt?
Yes, we don't really know that. You know, it burned through its first stage, and this very well could have been just a first stage test. Got to remember the debris landed on North Korean soil. That's important because every time that the North Korean missiles have fallen into the water, we go and look for the parts. And sometimes we find out some very interesting things. So I think that this could very well have been a successful test, and that really they intended to detonate it over North Korea. We don't know yet, but I don't think we can jump to the conclusion that it was a failed test.
You're one of the first, actually, that are pointing that out, and it's a very smart observation, because that is very true. Why, if you want to keep the evidence on your own land, why would you want to share it with the rest of the world and give away your secrets? This president deals with Kim Jong-un on a very different level. First of all, he's pushing their buttons, specifically on Twitter. You know, they have this alleged failed launch, and then the president comes out on Twitter, something that has really irked the Pyongyang regime. They have, in fact, launched verbal warnings against the U.S. and against the West based on President Trump's tweets. How do you feel about his use of Twitter when dealing with North Korea?
Well, he's certainly unnerved Kim Jong-un and the North Korean leadership. And this is like the first time that U.S. presidents have done this, because we've always treated them very gingerly, worried about what they would do.
Sure.
Now, getting them off their game is a precondition for a successful U.S. policy, but it can also lead to some pretty horrible outcomes. And it's going to be dependent on Trump and, indeed, his national security team to push the North Koreans in better directions skillfully and with a lot of determination. I think that he can do it, but nonetheless, this is a high-risk game. It has to be. You know, North Korea did not become instantly unstable, dangerous at noon on January 20th.
No, it's taken them 100 years to do this.
It's taken them a long time and some pretty bad U.S. policy in previous administrations. So Trump is in a sort of a bad position to start out with, and I think he's doing pretty well on this.
Okay, so he's got to obviously put pressure on China. One way of doing that, when he met with the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, in Florida, was to go ahead and launch that attack in Syria for the Assad regime using sarin gas against his own people. Did it send a strong enough message to China, considering China is still supporting Pyongyang? Yeah,
I think that was a really good move, because it talked about unnerving the Chinese, and that's also a precondition for getting the U.S. to be successful. You know, we cut Xi Jinping down to size by doing that, because Syria is a Chinese friend. I think what happened, I can't prove it, but what I think happened is that Xi Jinping really lost his confidence about dealing with Trump. He got unnerved himself. I think that they talked to the North Koreans and said, don't conduct that sixth nuclear test. And indeed, the North Koreans didn't do it, although everybody expected them to. They've had those 2 missile launches, but that is not a big provocation in the scheme of things. What everyone was looking for was that atomic test. It hasn't occurred. I think that's because Trump actually going after Xi Jinping in Mar-a-Lago.
Interesting. You know, we can't do this without China, can we?
No, but China is not really that helpful. I mean, even though they say they're not buying North Korean coal, they said that on February 18th. They bought North Korean coal in February, March, and April. They're buying North Korean minerals, which is also a violation of Security Council sanctions. So, you know, Trump's going to have to put a lot of pressure on Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership, because if he doesn't do that, Beijing will go back to its default position, which is just helping the North Koreans across the board.
Right. We need to also correct history, and there's a lot of history that needs correcting here. I mean, first of all, deals that were made back under the Clinton administration, for example, and further back, by lifting sanctions and giving deals to Pyongyang. You cannot do a deal with Pyongyang. You need to talk tough. But what does that mean?
What it means is really putting a lot of pressure on them and putting them in a place where they understand that they have no choice but to do what we want. So diplomacy is not always talking to people. Sometimes diplomacy is coercing them, because you coerce them and then you talk. This is what Reagan did with the Soviets. You know, he was not really willing to do things with Gorbachev until Gorbachev said, I surrender. And I think Trump is trying to do the same thing with Kim Jong-un. I hope that they don't start talks prematurely. Ultimately, we got to talk to the North Koreans, but only at the end of the process when we've won.
Absolutely. A lot of people are concerned that Kim Jong-un, if he's pushed too far, as he has made comments about taking it out on the West in the United States. We do want to remind those that they, at this point, we have no evidence that they have a transcontinental missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead.
Well, they haven't tested one. But I think that they've got at least 3 and maybe 4, because they showed off a new one on April 15th. But these missiles can't carry a nuclear warhead.
Correct.
That's going to take about 4 or 5 years for them to do. So
we can't let them get there.
We can't.
We need to stop
Absolutely.
it. Absolutely. All right. Gordon Chang, that's all the time we have, but always fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much.